Hello. I have been thinking a lot about the idea of fight, flight, or freeze. You have probably heard reaction. It is the reaction that happens in our bodies when we are dealing with some kind of threat. And historically, in the human evolution, um, the threat was something physical, like a wild animal, or it may have even been another human being who was, out to do harm. But as we've moved into modern society, the threat becomes has become a lot less concrete, and it can really be anything that is stressful in your day-to-day life, your family, job, finances, whatever it is that may cause you stress and anxiety. um, so you're probably all familiar with that, but here are a couple things that you may not know. The full scope of the stress reaction is fight, flight, or freeze. So fighting is obviously when you fight back. Flight is running away, and freeze is just kind of shutting down and not doing anything. And we are all capable of reacting in any one of the three ways. But for most people, they have a default reaction that's the one that they go into the majority of the time. So for me, it's freeze. If I'm under a lot of pressure or I'm feeling overwhelmed, I feel like I'm in mental quicksand. I feel paralyzed and I shut down and I can't seem to do anything. And I drag myself around thinking, I should be doing this. Why am I not doing that? And I kind of spin in my head and I don't really get very far. Um, and I think about all the actions that I'm supposed to take, and I don't take any of them. The second thing that I want to tell you is that the fight, flight, or freeze reaction isn't always extreme. So it's not always obvious, and so sometimes we can be in that reaction and not realize that that's happening. And this is important because if we don't know that it's happening, we can't deal with it effectively. And so often what happens is we notice the behaviors, but we're not connecting them to the stress reaction. And so sometimes we can it can result in judging ourselves or feeling shame. Like if we are in a fight reaction and we are feeling really irritable, and maybe we pick a fight with our spouse, or we bite our kids heads off for doing something that really isn't a big deal, and we know that we're behaving irrationally, and so we start to the critical voice in our head starts going, and thinking, what did I just say? I can't believe that. God, I'm such a terrible person, over and over again, because we haven't connected it to the the stress reaction. So if we are aware of what's happening, and we can say, "Oh my gosh, I just, bit off my partner's head. I must be feeling stressed and anxious about something. Let me take a step back and see what it is so that I can address it." When we have that level of awareness, then we can make some decisions and take some steps to kind of override the stress response and feel safer and more present in our bodies so that we can make better decisions. So I want to give you an example of that from my own life. So my default reaction is freeze. I would say I probably go into freeze 80 to 90% of the time. And so I just become a deer in headlights. I just frozen. Not really attractive, but anyway. Um, and so if it's an extreme situation, like, maybe having a big argument with someone or getting screamed at for whatever reason, I can identify that I'm going to go into freeze because the situation is really obvious. And so I know that that's what I do when I'm, in an extreme situation of anxiety. But what I've started to realize is that I can also go into a freeze reaction when the situation is more kind of day to day. and can be like a stressful situation that's happening over time. Um, Maybe, it could be over a series of days or weeks. It may just be in a particular situation that at first glance isn't really anxiety provoking, and so I don't necessarily realize that I'm in the stress response. So as a coach, my job is to create space for my clients' feelings without judgment. It's, you want to create that safe space where they can process their emotions without feeling like somebody's judging them or being critical, and that that it's okay for them to have whatever thoughts or feelings they have, and to be able to look at them and think about where they're coming from, and why they're experiencing them. And so, the only way to do this as a coach is I have to be comfortable with people being uncomfortable. And it's not that I want them to be uncomfortable just for the sake of being uncomfortable, but coaching is about making changes, and change is scary. So, inevitably, if someone is going through some kind of a change process in their life, there will be from time to time uncomfortable emotions that come up and that they have to process. And it doesn't mean anything's gone wrong. It just means that that is kind of where they are, and they're part of change is questioning the beliefs that we have been operating under and wondering whether or not they still make sense, and then making change. But we know our brains don't like change, so it makes us uncomfortable when it happens. So early on in my coaching career, I started to realize that I was having a hard time responding to my clients as effectively as I wanted to if they were in a space where they were feeling uncomfortable with whatever it is that they were talking about. And I'd get off the call and I would think, oh my gosh, I should have said this, or I should have asked this, or, why didn't I do this? And so then I would inevitably email them with those questions or comments, or I would bring them up again in the next session. But I felt like I wasn't being as present in the sessions as I could have been. And so the results that clients were getting were not happening as quickly as they would have been if I was more comfortable with what was happening. So it occurred to me, after I was thinking about it for a while, that I was in a subtle form of freeze. My client's discomfort was feeling like conflict, and so I was shutting down instead of being present to what they were feeling. And so my discomfort was causing me to kind of take a step back, and I wasn't stepping up in the way that I wanted to as a coach. So once I realized that this was happening in my brain and in my body, I was able to shift it. I started tapping on feeling safe and present with my clients' emotions, and I started to feel more comfortable in those sessions and better able to facilitate deeper conversations. So I just became more comfortable with them being uncomfortable. I didn't think that, oh no, something's gone wrong. I'm failing as a coach, or maybe this isn't working for them because it's hard. I just became comfortable with the idea that this is the process, this is what happens. And if it's not happening, that's actually more of a problem, because that means that we're not getting to the root emotions. Um, so, what I want you to do as you think about this is I want you to start to pay attention to how you react under stress. You may know already that you have a tendency towards, fight, flight, or freeze. And if you do, that's great. Um, so if you're not sure, especially um, or let's say you know that you tend towards fight, and so in an extreme situation you're pretty clear on that, that's exactly what's happening. But if that's your tendency, and you're in a situation that is less obviously stressful or maybe less dramatic, you may find yourself sniping at people or being short tempered, um, And if you're a flight person and there's something going on, maybe you're suddenly avoidance tactic. Um, and then if you're like me and you tend towards freeze, you might find yourself walking around thinking, I should have done this, I should have said that, and like kind of beating yourself up for all the things that you think you should have done and you didn't. And also remember that even though we all have that default behavior that we gravitate towards more often than others, we are all capable of all of these behaviors. So, maybe you are a freeze person, but suddenly you realize that you've just been so irritable with your teenager and it's really not anything that they're doing. You're just kind of pissed off about something. That may be a sign that there's something that's stressing you out that you want to look at. So, the goal in identifying these reactions and what's going on is not perfection. It's not that we're going to get to a point we're never going to go into the stress response. That is not really ideal anyway, because there are certainly times where we, you know, that that response is very appropriate. So it's not perfection, and it's definitely not to use the information against yourself. So, what I don't want you to do is identify, oh, yeah, I'm in fight right now. God, I can't believe how rude I was. Or I'm, just, I can't believe I did this. I'm such a terrible person. We don't want that either. What we want is to become aware of it, to acknowledge it, to forgive ourselves for this, and maybe, you may need to make an apology if you've done something and you reacted to someone in a way that really wasn't necessary. But also to kind of look at it and say, okay, I'm in fight right now. I'm stressed about something. Let me take a step back and think about what it is, what's going on, and how do I need to make myself feel safer? So once you have that awareness, then you can use tapping to help you shift your sense of safety so that you can feel safer and more present in your body. And you don't need to do a full blown tapping sequence in order to accomplish this. If it's an ongoing situation that's really causing you a lot of stress and anxiety, I would recommend that you tap regularly just to kind of bring your overall stress level down. But if you're in the middle of something and you are realizing, maybe you're having a conversation with somebody and it may not even be like, that anybody's screaming at anyone, but you have a difference of opinions, or you're talking about difficult emotions, and maybe you start to feel yourself sliding into that stress response. You can, one, just say, hey, you know what, I need a few minutes, and, can we come back in 5 minutes? Or you can just, quietly under the table or as you're having a conversation, pick a tapping point. So the ones that I think are the easiest to do kind of in the middle of people are side of the hand, and you can kind of put that under the table. The eyebrow point, depending on where you are and what you're doing, or the collarbone point. And you can just start tapping and just in your mind or out loud, depending on the situation, you could say something like this, which is, even though I feel my body going into fight, flight, or freeze, and I would just name the specific reaction that you're having, I choose to feel safe and calm in my body. Even though I'm going into fight, flight, or freeze, it's safe to relax and be present in my body. Even though this situation is triggering my stress response, I choose to feel safe and secure in my body. I choose to allow my brain to think more clearly so that I can make better decisions. It doesn't have to be exactly those words. It can be something like that. It can even be something as easy as, I'm in the stress response right now. I choose to be safe in my body. Or I am safe. I am safe. I am safe. Anything to just help start to calm the nervous system down. you may not be able, if you're at a 10 with your stress level, it may not come down to a 1 that quickly. But even if you're at a 10 and you can bring it down to a 7, that's a pretty significant shift, and that's going to help you navigate the situation a little bit more easily. And the more you practice this process, the better off you will get. Ideally, there may be certain things that you will be able to get to a point where they don't trigger you at all. So maybe, you're really triggered when your 2-year-old throws themselves on the floor in the supermarket, and you go into freeze, like, oh my God, what do I do? People are looking at me, and you just don't know what to do. You could feasibly get yourself to a point where your child throws a temper tantrum, you're like, okay, time to go. You scoop the kid up, you put them in the shopping cart, or you just carry them out of the store, or you do whatever it is that you need to do. So it is possible for you to get to that point where there's no trigger at all. It's also possible that you can just become more aware of specific situations that trigger you and have these resources in your back pocket to use ahead of time going into the situation. Like, I know if, I'm talking to my boss about the upcoming project, I tend to get really anxious and I go into flight or I freeze or whatever. So before I have that meeting, I'm going to do some tapping on feeling safe in my body, or I'm going to meditate, or I'm going to, write down 10 times I feel safe in my body. Whatever strategies you use that are the most helpful for you to be calm and present in your body. So it is definitely something that you have control over. And again, the more aware you are, the better. But just keep in mind that, and also if you can start to be aware of like the tells in your body, like when you're feeling stressed, maybe you get a knot in the pit of your stomach, or your breathing gets shallow, or your limbs tense up, whatever it is, be on the lookout for those, because that's going to help you realize what's going on. And again, they may be more or less obvious in certain situations, so just pay attention and remember that you have these tools to help you navigate the situation by calming your nervous system down so that you can think a little bit more clearly and hopefully end up with a more positive outcome. So I hope that is helpful. And if you are interested in a longer tapping sequence around fight, flight, or freeze, I should be posting a video on my YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So take a look for that. And there are plenty of other videos on the channel around specific stressors. So if you're looking for something around different aspects of life, take a look there as well. All right. Well, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.